The stage was set, bright lights illuminating the massive studio, casting shadows that danced along the walls. The familiar jingle of Family Feud filled the air, but there was an electric tension that rippled through the audience. Something extraordinary was about to unfold. As the camera panned across the eager faces, it landed on Steve Harvey, the legendary host, whose trademark mustache twitched slightly in anticipation. Little did he know, tonight's episode would etch itself into the annals of television history forever. In the spotlight stood the Ramirez family, their smiles wide and eyes glinting with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Leading them was Carlos Ramirez, a 32-year-old father of two, whose laughter was infectious. He had spent years working as a mechanic, just scraping by to provide for his family. It was a life full of struggles, but also full of love. Beside him stood his wife, Maria Ramirez, a spirited woman with an unyielding belief in family unity, and their children, 10-year-old Lucas and 8-year-old Sophia, whose youthful exuberance added a sprinkle of magic to the evening. The Ramirez family's journey to this moment had not been easy. They had applied to be on Family Feud countless times, facing rejection after rejection. Yet they never lost hope. This was their chance to not only win some money but to showcase their bond, the tight-knit family that had weathered storms together. There was a palpable energy in the air. They could feel that this was their moment to shine, to share their story with the world. The opposing team, the Johnson family, had an air of confidence that was almost palpable. Led by David Johnson, a charismatic business consultant, he exuded charm and wit. His family was polished, prepared, and ready to win. The tension between the two families was thick enough to cut with a knife. It was a battle of the heart, a contest not just for cash prizes, but for pride, legacy, and the very essence of what it meant to be family. As the first round rolled out, questions flew by in rapid succession, each team racing to press the buzzer, competing not just to win, but to outshine the other. Laughter erupted as family anecdotes and humorous stories spilled forth, filling the studio with a warmth that resonated with viewers at home. But beneath the laughter, a storm was brewing, a moment that would shatter the jovial atmosphere. Then it happened. Steve Harvey posed a seemingly innocent question, the kind designed to evoke lighthearted banter. Name something you would hate to find out your spouse is hiding from you. The audience erupted in laughter, the usual banter lighting up the room. But then, Carlos Ramirez stepped forward, his face a mask of seriousness, a stark contrast to the gaiety surrounding him. "Steve," he began, his voice steady but laden with something deeper, something personal. "I'd hate to find out she's hiding the fact that she's not my kid's real mother." A ripple of gasps swept across the audience, punctuating the air with disbelief. The joviality dissolved into silence, as if the entire studio had collectively inhaled and forgot to exhale. Steve stammered, his usual confidence faltering under the weight of Carlos's revelation. The lights dimmed slightly, spotlighting the raw emotion that hung in the air. It was a simple yet devastating confession, a truth that had remained buried and unspoken. The tension escalated, and the audience was left in a state of shock, their eyes darting between Carlos and Steve, as if seeking answers they weren't prepared to find. "Wait, what?" Steve's voice came out louder than intended, his brow furrowed in confusion. The look on his face was not just one of surprise. It was a reflection of his deep empathy, a recognition that the revelation had the potential to unearth long-hidden family secrets and unresolved pain. This was no longer a game. It had morphed into something profoundly intimate and heart-wrenching. Carlos continued, his gaze fixated on the audience, drawing them into the depths of his vulnerability. "My father was never there for me. I got a call one day. It shattered my world. I found out that the woman I thought was my mother had taken my siblings and fled. I don't know who I am anymore, and I'm terrified of that same fate for my kids." His voice quivered, the weight of his confession hanging heavy in the air, as tears glistened in the corners of his eyes. The audience held its breath, a collective gasp of empathy rippling through the seats. It was a moment of raw truth, a confession that cut through the layers of playful banter and brought the game show to a screeching halt. The audience, once exhilarated by the competitive spirit of the game, now found themselves wrapped in a blanket of solemnity as they absorbed the gravity of Carlos's emotional burden. Steve stood motionless, his mouth slightly agape, frozen on stage. The charismatic host, known for his quick wit and comedic timing, was stripped bare of words, the gravity of Carlos's statement gripping his heart. Moments passed in silence, but it felt like an eternity. The audience could sense the shift. The stage lights, the cameras, the laughter, all faded into the background, leaving only the anguish of a father's despair in the spotlight. "Steve, I need to know," Carlos continued, his voice trembling. "What if I'm just repeating the cycle? What if my kids end up lost like I was?" The room felt as though it was holding its breath, the weight of his question palpable, each viewer grappling with the fear of their own familial legacies. Lost for words, Steve took a deep breath, his heart pounding as he processed the gravity of the situation. The boundary between host and contestant blurred, revealing the humanity beneath the surface. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of emotion on the faces of those present. No one could have predicted that a simple game show would unravel into a cathartic exploration of love, fear, and the complexities of family relationships. As silence enveloped the studio, a compelling mystery loomed. What would Steve say? How would the audience react? And most importantly, how would Carlos's revelation change the course of their lives forever? An unprecedented emotional journey lay ahead, and the world tuned in, eager to witness the unfolding drama that lay at the crossroads of vulnerability and hope. As the silence stretched on, it felt like time itself had frozen in the studio. Every eye was glued to Carlos, the contestant who had just bared his soul in a way that no one had anticipated. The air was thick with tension, a palpable mix of disbelief and empathy. Steve Harvey, usually the master of ceremonies, stood momentarily paralyzed, his charismatic smile replaced with a look of genuine concern. He had faced numerous unexpected moments in his career, but what had just unfolded was a chasm deeper than the game itself. "Carlos," Steve finally said, his voice steady but tinged with an urgency that cut through the silence. "You've opened up about some heavy stuff, but tell me, what brought you here today? What do you really want to say to your family?" The audience leaned in, hanging on to Carlos's every word as he took a deep breath, his face etched with a mixture of vulnerability and resolve. "I want them to know I'm sorry. Sorry for the times I didn't show up, for the moments I let them down while chasing my own dreams." His voice quivered, but the conviction behind it was undeniable. Steve took a step closer, the distance between them shrinking, creating an atmosphere that was both intimate and intense. "And what do you think they need to hear from you, brother?" His question was more than just a prompt. It was an invitation to delve deeper into the emotional tumult swirling within Carlos. The contestant's eyes glistened as he responded, "I need them to understand that family isn't just about blood. It's about being there, and I've failed at that. I've put my aspirations before my family, and it's time I faced the consequences of that." The audience seemed to collectively hold their breath, sensing the gravity of this moment. It was no longer just about points or winning a game. It was about healing. Yet, amidst the tension, a flicker of concern began to pulse in Steve's chest. He had seen families torn apart before, and he could feel the weight of Carlos's honesty pressuring the fragile threads of familial love that bound them. Just then, a voice rose from the crowd, a woman who had been quietly sobbing since Carlos began his revelation. "But Carlos, they deserve your love and presence. How can you just stand there and say this?" Her words echoed, igniting a spark of conflict that reverberated through the studio. The audience murmured in agreement, their emotions swirling between support for Carlos and frustration at his apparent neglect. Steve, ever the mediator, turned to the woman. "Hold on. We're all processing this together. Carlos is being vulnerable, and that takes a lot of courage." He glanced back at Carlos, whose expression now reflected a storm of emotions. Regret, sorrow, but also a hint of defiance. "But we need to understand something. What's stopping you from making things right with your family?" Carlos swallowed hard, a mix of fear and determination dancing in his features. "I've created walls, Steve, walls that I thought would protect me but only isolated me. I can't just knock them down overnight. It's scary." "Scary, yes," Steve said, his voice low yet encouraging. "But think about what you could gain: real relationships, real love. What's the alternative? Staying in this pain." The tension heightened as Carlos seemed to retreat inward, grappling with the stark reality of his choices. The audience was engrossed, their faces a canvas of empathy and contemplation. A battle was unfolding, not just within Carlos but also within the hearts of everyone present. "Do you see how this is affecting everyone?" Steve pressed, the urgency in his tone rising. "You're not just a contestant on a game show. You're a person with a life and connections that matter." Carlos clenched his fists, the internal conflict boiling beneath his skin. He looked down, the weight of expectation and anxiety pressing heavily on his shoulders. "I didn't mean for it to get this deep," he murmured, almost to himself. "Deep?" Steve exclaimed, an edge in his voice that demanded attention. "Carlos, you opened that door. You put your heart on the table. Now it's time to deal with the emotions that come flooding in." Carlos looked up, his eyes meeting Steve's, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them. "What if they don't forgive me?" His voice cracked, a vulnerability breaking through the facade he had built around himself. Steve took a deep breath, the atmosphere thickening with vulnerability. "What if they do? What if this is a chance to rebuild? You have to trust that love can heal, but it starts with you taking that first step." The studio audience began to shift restlessly, the tension palpable, mixed with hope and despair. Could Carlos really bridge the gap he had created with his actions? There was a sense of urgency in the air, a collective anticipation of what would come next. Suddenly, from the back of the studio, a figure emerged, a woman with tears streaming down her face. It was Carlos's sister, Maria. As she approached the stage, the energy shifted dramatically. Her presence transformed the atmosphere. An embodiment of love and pain rolled into one. "Carlos," she called out, her voice trembling yet strong. "I came here hoping to see you, but I never expected this. I've missed you so much." The sight of Maria sent shockwaves through Carlos. She was the embodiment of everything he had neglected, everything he had pushed away in pursuit of his ambitions. "Maria, he began, the words clinging to his throat, but Maria raised her hand, stopping him. "Wait, before you say anything, I need you to know that I love you, but I'm angry that you've been absent from our lives. We've felt your absence every day." The audience held their breath as Carlos's face transformed, panic giving way to a raw realization. "I know, and I'm so sorry. I thought I was doing the right thing by chasing my dreams, but I realize now that I neglected what truly matters." Maria stepped closer, her expression shifting from anger to compassion. "It's not too late, brother, but it will take real effort. You have to show up for us, no more excuses." Steve watched the interaction unfold, a mix of admiration and concern washing over him. This was the moment of truth, a reckoning that could either lead to reconciliation or further heartache. "Carlos," Steve interjected, his voice firm and filled with conviction. "What will you do now? This is your chance to start repairing that bond. You've opened the door, now step through." Carlos stood there, his heart pounding as he faced the reality of his actions. The stage felt both suffocating and liberating. He looked into Maria's eyes, seeing the love tempered by hurt, and the resolve surged within him. "I'll do whatever it takes. I'll show up, I promise." As he spoke those words, a wave of relief washed over Maria, her expression softening. "Then let's start this journey together." The audience erupted into applause, a cathartic release of pent-up emotions, but Steve felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a turning point for Carlos. It was a reminder of the fragility of family ties, the necessity of love, and the essential courage it takes to confront one's own shortcomings. "Ladies and gentlemen," Steve said, turning to face the camera, "what we just witnessed goes beyond a game show. This is about real people facing real issues. And if you're out there watching, remember, it's never too late to reconnect. Never too late." The applause grew louder, filling the studio with a sense of unity that transcended the game itself. Carlos's journey was just beginning, but at that moment, hope flickered in the air, a testament to the power of vulnerability, family, and the chance for redemption. The applause grew louder, filling the studio with a sense of unity that transcended the game itself. Carlos's journey was just beginning, but at that moment, hope flickered in the air, a testament to the power of vulnerability, family, and the chance for redemption. As Carlos stood there, a mixture of disbelief and gratitude washed over him. He felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Harvey, still processing the emotional influx of the moment, stepped closer to Carlos, his eyes reflecting an understanding that went beyond the surface. "Listen, Carlos," Steve began, his voice steady but soft. "You just opened up about something that many of us carry silently. It takes real courage to share your truth. You've inspired not just the audience here, but people watching from home." Carlos blinked rapidly, feeling the tears threaten to spill over again. This time, however, they were tears of relief. I never thought I could talk about it, Steve. I always thought it would just tear my family apart more. But maybe it's time for healing." Steve nodded, his expression shifting from one of surprise to one of admiration. "And sometimes it takes a moment like this to spark that healing. You know, your family is probably feeling the weight of this moment too. They might just be waiting for you to lead the way." The audience was captivated, leaning in as the connection between Carlos and Steve deepened. This was no longer just a game show. It had evolved into a powerful demonstration of vulnerability and emotional courage. The applause continued to swell, a backdrop to the rawness of the moment, a reminder that in confronting the past, there was strength to be found. In the immediate aftermath of their exchange, Carlos's family rushed onto the stage, enveloping him in a group hug that spoke volumes. The cameras captured the genuine affection, but what the audience couldn't see was the unspoken dialogue that passed between them. Each tear shed was a story untold, a wound slowly beginning to heal. As the embrace lingered, Carlos turned to Steve, a small smile breaking through the tears. "Thank you, Steve. I don't know how I would have done this without your support." Steve chuckled, a warm, infectious laugh. "Sometimes, all we need is a little nudge to jump into the deep end. You found your voice today, Carlos. Don't ever lose it." As the show wrapped up, the atmosphere buzzed with excitement. The immediate consequence of this moment was palpable. Carlos's life had shifted from one of silent suffering to a newly forged connection with his family. He felt buoyed by the support, the warmth of their love igniting a spark he hadn't known existed. Weeks turned into months, and Carlos began the process of reconnecting with his family in ways he had never anticipated. He organized family dinners, encouraging open conversations about their shared past. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of tension and emotional outbursts, but each conversation became a building block. They shared stories, hopes, and dreams once buried under layers of pain and anger. Carlos learned to listen, to forgive, and to express love openly, transforming his family dynamic. Steve, on the other end, continued to carry the impact of that episode with him. He often reflected on it during his own moments of doubt, realizing that vulnerability wasn't just for the contestants but for him as well. He found himself sharing similar stories with audiences, using Carlos as an example of courage in his speeches and engagements. The show began to include segments focused on emotional health, creating a platform for others to share their journeys of healing. Months passed, and the ripple effect of that singular moment began to unfold in ways both Carlos and Steve hadn't foreseen. Carlos reached out to the local community, connecting with groups that focused on family dynamics and mental health. He became a voice for others who felt unheard, sharing his own experience and encouraging those around him to embrace their vulnerabilities. The community response was overwhelming. People began to open up, sharing their own stories in a safe space that Carlos helped create. For Steve, the impact of that day continued to resonate long after the cameras stopped rolling. The episode became one of the most talked about in the history of the show, sparking discussions across social media and beyond. Fans wrote to him, sharing how Carlos's story inspired them to mend relationships they had thought irreparably damaged. Steve found himself flooded with messages, each one a testament to the power of connection and the importance of family. Years later, Carlos stood in front of a group of young adults, sharing the journey that had begun on the stage of Family Feud. His voice, once shaky and uncertain, was now firm and confident. He spoke about the power of confronting one's fears, the beauty of vulnerability, and the necessity of healing. The auditorium was silent, every eye fixed on him, captivated by the sincerity of his words. "Don't be afraid to share your story," Carlos urged, his heart full. "You never know who might be waiting to hear it, who might be inspired to step into their own light." Meanwhile, Steve Harvey had become a household name, but more than that, he had evolved into a figure associated with emotional resilience. He often spoke of Carlos in interviews, emphasizing how their encounter fundamentally changed him. "It's not just about the games. It's about the people. Each story has the power to change lives," he would say, his voice filled with conviction. The years danced by, and what began as a singular moment of vulnerability blossomed into a movement of healing and connection that rippled across families, communities, and beyond. Carlos and Steve had forged an unbreakable bond, one rooted in empathy and understanding, proving that even in the face of adversity, hope and redemption were always within reach. And as they both reflected on that fateful day, they knew they had not just changed their own lives. They had impacted countless others, creating a legacy that would echo through time.